worries at all. Okay, so who am I? So first thing I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the country and lands we're meeting on today, and acknowledge my the elders past, present, and emerging, and noting that we're across many lands today, which is good, and good to see some of the people I've met in the past. And again, a lot of our work is trying to help with getting whole of government data aligned, and that sort of fits nicely with this group and where we're going. So who am I? So Philip, I kind of 17, 18 years with the ABS, and then I've just months ago moved over to the ONDC after 12 months of progressing the data inventory pilot program. That ended 53-year continuous service of my family at the ABS. It's a lot of data background in the social and national accounts and other areas. And then when the ONDC got some funding, they said, can you come across and help get some whole of government work going? So that's why I've sort of come over and joined. What I'm going to do is just give a quick overview of the ONDC and what we're calling the Data Availability and Transparency Act data. Start with the acronym first, scheme, and where that fits in, how we're helping, starting at the federal level, but we're coming down and chatting with the jurisdictions a lot through the DDNM, but I'll come back to that. And at the end, we'll have time for some questions. We're recording this in case others can't make it, and in case there's more you want to share back with your jurisdictions around this sort of this information. All right, so the agenda, going to look at the unlocking the national data. What was the driver for ONDC being stood up, how the Data Act came into being, and then how the different areas are working to support the data scheme. So data discovery, data sharing through the Dataplace, and then supporting the agencies to get involved in the data scheme. So unlocking national data, of course, there was a few barriers to getting into the government data that we're all aware of. And that was a driver for starting up a group that started generating the idea of the Office of National Data Commissioner. With that, they were looking to increase transparency and try and find ways of getting into government data and make it more available for people. With that, the Data Availability Transparency Scheme and the Act was set up, and the Act was to override nearly 500-ish legislations that were sort of stopping interagency sharing. So when we get up to those that level of sharing, sometimes it's good to have an overarching one that all of government signs onto. We got the DAT Act through minutes before Parliament closed, just before the election, so before they went into lockdown. Okay, data sharing, again, we all know the benefits of that. So in the immediate time frame that we've been having ONDC, Office of National Data Commissioner, set up, we've been helping out with the COVID, the disaster. Of course, we had the Black Summers, and we've had the floods, and we've had several other things that are coming through. The impacts of the COVID and the secondary impacts of sort of getting content out to people. High value policy programs being supported with government data, having access to all of the data that's available, and not just trying to bend and analyse in the right directions. Office of National Data Commissioner. So then the commissioner was set up. So how it works is Gail is the Australian National Data Commissioner. She's an independent authority unto herself, and finance has us, the staff, seconded to her. That means she's independent and can talk to agencies about it without having to have the worry of you talking to finance about stuff. So it's a nice way to go about it. What's the ONDC trying to do? So we're trying to support the data sharing for the public benefit. We're going to build the data sharing capability across public services, operate effectively and efficiently as a regulator and educator, and build trust and transparency. So they sound easy, but you see a lot of the things in there are building capacity, sharing knowledge, building trust, making things more transparent. That has an educative role. So you can see where the patterns of that is going for uplifting of the skills within the agencies, as well as getting a requirement for input into the ONDC. The data scheme works this is sort of it in a page. We've got the accredited users. So these are Commonwealth agencies that are able to use the scheme and participate in sharing. So we've got the data custodian. So any agency that has data is a data custodian by default. There's no application to be a data custodian. You actually have data, and people that are accredited will be able to come and ideally see what data you've got and be able to put in requests to share it, as they have done in a limited way. The accreditation for data service providers is a bit, that's sort of the heavier duty bit. That's where we say, I want to share the data, and you have to have the environment set up similar to the ABS's data labs, those sort of things that have the security and the other requirements for mitigating data breaches and aligning data. So similar to the integrating authorities of the past, now we're actually looking at those accredited data service providers for sharing of the data. Benefits of participating in the scheme, again, we all understand that if we're aware of them, the legislative override is handy. So sometimes we've tried to share some data and we haven't been able to because of certain legislations at the jurisdictional level or at the federal level, or one agency is just not connecting in the right ways. So some of those legislations were looked at. There's some that you can still imagine are in place. So defence and the police and a few other people are completely out of scope, ASIOs and ASICs and things like that. They're out of scope of doing the sharing under the Data Availability and Transparency Act. Streamlining and consistent data sharing. So if we've got a way of doing it, let's make it consistent so that people can get on board and do it as seamlessly as possible. The environment we've seen in a couple of the fora for data lately has shown that people are moving through their roles a lot faster. So the knowledge of someone that's in their role for 10 years is now down to 3, and now down to I think 1.8 years was the last number I saw at a last conference. Managing the data sharing requests and agreements. Again, keeping that knowledge internal to your agency is good, but sharing what sharing is going on and managing of that is helpful to see what others might be able to share. So this data asset is being shared between these agencies. Could we, instead of asking ourselves, can we get involved in that and use those sort of things and registering and recording that? Transparency on the other side of the regulation, transparency and oversight to mitigate risk. Again, if we know it's out there, making it visible to people helps mitigate some of the worries that people have about where does my data go, who's sharing it, what's being used in there. So making it transparent, people can ask the questions that and be supported in the information about knowing where their information is going and what data is moving around. The topics of data sovereignty have been coming up, and I've given it to you, but where's it sharing on to? Some of the data breaches have been identifying, well, I didn't know I had that third party provider had that sort of data about me. So within Australian government, having that transparency of where things are moving is handy. And then accreditation and support of the capability to share that. So again, that's those accredited service providers so that we can check and do quality assurance on those and make sure that if any new standards come in for sharing, we can make sure everyone's aware of that. That's sort of the high level parts. Now we start getting to the rubber hitting the road and making it a tangible. So what we've got is 3 elements in here that we're bringing under for usefulness. Data inventory pilot program. This is me. So we got some funding, $16.5 million to go out and help agencies get their internal inventories for 30 to 35 agencies. We're doing well with that. At the moment, I've just finished the 19th agency project. I've got another 11 underway, and I'm talking to another 11 to 20 agencies. I'll be well and truly able to get past the 30 to 35. So that means we're doing well. The process is repeating, and the idea is that we'll be producing the guidance so that if an agency isn't able to be part of the pilot, they'll be able to pick up the guidance, pick up some of the artifacts that we've produced and repeat the process themselves. And then we can give some support in a lighter touch way. Once the agency has their internal inventory using the 26 metadata attributes I'll get to in a moment, that will then give them the knowledge to say, right, what would we like to share? What can we share on the Australian Government Data Catalogue? Australian Government Data Catalogue is where you'll be able to go in and do your searching for what data assets are across government. Some agencies are looking to identify the use and increase the use of administrative data. If we find someone's already got it, then we don't have to go out and do a survey collection or any of the other ways that we've historically gone to get data, and the reuse then supports the better quality and collections, because we're not oversampling people. Once you've got the Australian data catalogue, we then move into the Dataplace. So Dataplace is, once you search for something over the catalogue, you then go to Dataplace and say, could I please have access to or share that information? The searches you'll find, there'll be a collection that say this data asset. So if we say there's 10 data assets come up, 6 of those are available on data.gov.au. Here's a link to where it is in data.gov.au. Now there's another 3, and those 3 are being shared between agencies already. The ATO and ABS are sharing single touch payroll, and how do we go about doing that? And they're agreements that will have to be done at higher SES and agency levels. Then there's some extreme data assets. There might be one of those that says, right, this is something that you will need the Data Availability Transparency Act to come in and help support your reason for it and why the agency or the owner, custodian of that, should be sharing it. And that's where the data commissioner's role comes in. It says you've now used Dataplace to put in that request. The onus is now on the requested agency to give a response and say, yes, you can share it, or no, these are the restrictions, or just no, you can't have it. If the answer is no, the commissioner could come in and then say, please explain a bit more. For the data inventory pilot program, we've sort of split it up into 6 sort of chevrons. The preparation stage is before we do an inventory with an agency. We're getting a deployment plan set up. What's your agency context? Have you been doing an inventory before? What does it look like? What sort of format's it in? Engaging with the data areas. Which area? Do you have a centralized data steward area? Do you have it across agency? Will we be looking at 5 or 6 areas? The pilots are only doing a proof of concept in a 12 to 16 week period. So in that time, you're not getting a whole of government pilot done. So it's getting a proof of concept, engaging with the agency. So the contract partners will come in and do, if you provide 2 staff, we provide 2 staff, and give that uplift so that the staff have a repeatable process. The data deployment, the deployment of the data inventory is now we know what we're going to do and the scope of it. Let's go and make sure we line to the data 26 metadata attributes that were set up with the data champion. You can see those down the bottom there. Consolidating the data we've brought it in from multiple areas, getting that alignment and consistency using the controlled vocabularies that we sort of set up, and then testing that with the agency and saying, now we've produced an inventory. Is this useful? Can you see it working? Is there any other tweaks we need to do? And what is the next stage for your continual improvement? And they then cycle back to step 1, get the engagement with their SES, form up a process to expand their next tranche or go back to different areas, and it continues through. So the 26 metadata attributes, I'm sure most of you have heard of that before. If not, it was set up over 3 years with the Data Champions Network, conceptually saying we need to get some consistent metadata across government. The next year, refining that set of data, and the 3rd year was just sort of testing it and saying, was this, how easy is this going to be for agencies? Some had to stretch to it, and some said, yep, we can automatically pull that out of our more complex systems. Over the side, you can see the participating agencies that I've got so far range from Asbestos Australia, which I think they just had a staff increase up to 16 in total. And then we've got DSS and Home Affairs. And so the scale of the agency is important to me to make sure we've got representative samples so that anyone can pick up the artifacts and we know that it's going to work. And I was just before this one meeting with the National Library to get their styles of data holdings as well. Jump into the next one. So Dataplace, as I've mentioned before, Dataplace is where we're going to be putting in the requests for the data sharing. So now you've got the data listed on the Australian Government Data Catalogue from the agencies. Now we want to be able to go in there and see what's available, how do I request it, and how do I get the right contacts. As the agency registers that they are a custodian of data and they've got sharing mechanisms in place, you get the right person's name. Sometimes we know an agency or a holder might have some data, but it might take you forever going to information at ABS or somewhere to get that person. Having them registered through Dataplace helps get the inquiries to the right place and at the right level. And then the mechanisms internal to the agency help them decide whether they're at what level they need to sign off on those agreements with sharing. Let me jump to the next one. Now, Dataplace it's been progressing, and they've been doing a beta version testing that people have been invited to join to see how the functionality will work. That's been going well. They've done a release in late April where they're doing some testing the reporting of the process. We've now just had in the last week our first accredited user get lined up, and that means that accredited user can then start putting in requests through the scheme. The intent in the next coming months is to get more agencies accredited through that process. And to assist that, there's been some guidances and preparations set up to try and make it seamless, same as we're doing with the data inventory pilot projects. We don't want the process to be a barrier, so we're looking to support that with some good guidance and some good checklists. You can see down there, September, October, we're in integration with the data catalog. Now, this group will be very keen to know about the data catalog. Fortunately, we're still in procurement for that. We've been doing some testing. We've got some requirements that we've enhanced through doing these data inventory pilot projects, which has been good. And we're exploring a couple of options still at the moment. So where we had previously nominated having a proof of concept for June this year, we're now moving that out to be still continuing the process and engaging agreed direction by that sort of August type timeframe, and then by the end of the year have a definite direction. So we're sort of 6 months behind where we'd like to be, and we're still engaging in that. And I'll keep this group informed as we can over time. Next one. So looking at the checklist for a data custodian in the preparation for the scheme, we're all familiar with the foundational 4. So the foundational 4 goes through a set of elements, getting your senior leadership engaged in data. Now, some of these things are being driven and being supported by the original Australian government data strategy. A government data and digital strategy has just been released, and that's now available to view on the line, and it will soon go into public consultation. So we're giving people time to read it, get their thoughts together, consolidate whether they want to be coming back to those in the future. The foundational 4 has the strategy, so getting your leadership involved, getting your strategic alignment, working out the plans, the data strategies, and getting all of the governance that you're needing. Through our networking, people have been sharing deployment plans, they've been sharing other strategies, getting their implementation plans off their data strategies. The governance, so the roles and SES accountabilities has come through from PM&C, internal to government. So external to government, you haven't really seen it, but it's out there. And that's helping people work out the roles and the responsibilities at the different granularities. And then the asset discovery again comes back to the data inventory team, plus what will be coming up in the catalogue. Okay, the accreditation checklist. So created this checklist to start prompting the identification of key consultation and coordination steps in developing your organisation's application. What we're finding at the end of the data inventory pilot project, you now know what you've got internally. That's helping you share, and you might find there's one area, 5 areas that are going to the same provider of ABS data, just say, and asking for it. Have centralising that through your internal inventory saves up some a bit more clean data stewardship. And then once you've got the data stewardship, the application checklist helps you organise. Your organisation is now internally set. What can we share externally? Now we want to check on how the organisation is going, and is it eligible to be part of the Act? There's not much that the jurisdictions and those that I believe are in the room are eligible, and we have been talking to the jurisdictions. And this is where I mentioned the DDMM, and I should have written down what it stands for, but essentially that's the jurisdictions coming together, and they're looking at producing a national data catalogue currently using a subset of the 26 metadata attributes. Getting on board to the Dataplace, addressing the criteria and ready to submit. So that's giving some support for Dataplace. And again, this one's just finishing off with contact details and the data discovery. We've got a lot of guidances that are now coming up on data sharing, and they're available on the Data Commissioner website there. datacommissioner.gov.au, and those guidances are being extended. And once we get a more definitive list of those coming months, I'll also send them over to the Link Digital team.